So, Ru, pleasure to have you on the show. As we were talking before we started to record, I really respect the business that you built and want to dive into Surf Simply quite a bit. I guess first question from a rookie surfer, like by rookie surfer, a person that spent only 1 week surfing in Costa Rica. What advice would you give to someone that wants to start surfing or is considering, like the that sport?
Well, thanks very much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here, and an admirer of yours as well. It's been great hearing you talk a bit about what you guys do. I think that surfing is one of the most difficult sports to actually move forward with. Out of certainly any sport I've ever done, I think I tried boxing for a while there, and I was just trying to remember what to do when someone punched me in the face. So that was pretty difficult. But yeah, I mean, you can be like up and going on a snowboard within a day. I think comparably in surfing, you might be looking at some number of months to be in um, at a similar level, without any guidance. So I would first of all lower your expectations, and secondly, I would try and budget for spending a lot of time in the water. And the third thing I would do is try and get away from this obsession that people have with thinking that standing up on the board is doing it and lying down is not doing it. I'm very tempted to dive into the technicalities of surfing here, but I won't do that and alienate your audience. But I will just say this, that surfing in layman's terms is really the game of how close can you get the board to the white water without getting stuck in the white water, if that makes sense. When a wave is breaking, it peels down the line and there is a part of the wave that's unbroken and green on the face and a part of the wave that is broken and is white on the face. And everything we're trying to do on any kind of surfboard, whether it's big wave riding or small wave riding or being inside the barrel, which is, of course, the iconic pinnacle of surfing, or nose riding or longboard, all of this is really just the game of getting your board as close to that, what we call the critical part of the wave, the white water, as we can, but without getting stuck in it. And that's the game. And if you think of surfing in those terms, suddenly everything that you see starts to make a lot of sense straight away.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it makes me want to buy a surfboard. Maybe a few surf questions if you would tempt me.
Sure.
What is the biggest appeal? Like you've coached, I wanted like thousands of people, right? Like, so is there a way to simplify like the appeal of like, is it the adrenaline rush of like surviving, let's say like a slightly dangerous sport? Is it the technical mastery of like, hey, like after like you said months of learning, you're able to like actually achieve athletic performance, or is it something or is it not? It's not something that you can simplify down to one or two things?
I think that's a great question. And I think that there isn't any one answer. I think for most people, it's not really an adrenaline sport. That side of surfing tends to get a lot of publicity because it's very dramatic seeing people come down the front of 60-foot waves. But for most of us, that's not what we're doing. I think that what I really enjoy about surfing is that when I'm out in the water, I'm using my brain and my body to its fullest capacity. I'm having to think really hard. I'm having to physically work really hard. I'm having to think about what I'm doing, and then all of these skills, which like with all sports and all musical instruments and most physical skills that you learn, they begin with logically understanding how it works, then repeating it until it starts to become an intuitive action that you don't have to think about. And then as soon as it is, you build another layer on top of that. So you build, pattern on top of pattern on top of pattern until you're doing something which is so complex it would have been or seemingly impossible when you first started. And that's incredibly rewarding. But, there's a lot of other things that are wonderful about surfing. It's a great excuse to travel and go to that place you wouldn't have otherwise gone to. And of course, it's lovely being out in nature, and it's a great excuse to be disconnected. And it's one of the most sociable sports. I live here a couple of 100 yards away from the beach, and every time I go out for a surf, I end up chatting with half the town who are out there as well. And that's one of my favorite things. So it's unlike most sports, which are sort of one thing. You get on the court and you hit the ball or kick the ball on the field. With surfing, there's like travel, and then there's paddling and being out in nature. And then there's thinking really hard. And sometimes there's, thinking not at all and just enjoying being there. So it's really a lot of different activities wrapped into one.
Yeah. At what point did you realize that surfing was going to be your life's calling, or at least until now, like something that you want to dedicate, this mixture of sport and business?
That's actually a really interesting question. I'm a big advocate of not getting too obsessed with goals. long-term goals, because usually the stuff that really makes life worth living, and actually the stuff that makes businesses really fantastic, tends to just pop up in your peripheral vision in the corner of your eye when you were really focusing on something else. And I started teaching surfing back in the 90s in England. And I didn't really think it would be a lifelong, certainly not a career. But then it just became really obvious to me that there was entry level surfing, the type that I'm sure you're familiar with. And also there was higher level elite coaching, which you may not be familiar with, but was also common and still is. And there was really nothing that connected those two. There was like the coaching for the bottom 1% and the top 1%. And I happened to be doing both, because I was doing a lot of entry level coaching and working with the British junior team at the same time. And that the lack of roadmap from one to the other really leapt out at me. Plus, I was doing just a lot of coaching, and I always think, whatever you do in life, just do it really, really well, and it becomes really fun. And I have kind of the sort of mind that likes to do a bit of science. And so I started A/B testing, what if I teach 200 people this way and 200 people that way? And I was working at a surf school where we had such big numbers coming through in England that I was able to kind of use that volume to tease out the noise in the data and see what effects were real in terms of good coaching. And it just became a fascinating project. And I mean, I could go on and talk to you about how the rest of the business evolved, but I mean, there's a saying that I really like, which is that everything is interesting if you look closely enough at it. I can't remember who said it, but it was one of those things where the more closely I started looking at this thing, the more fascinating I found it, and then the more passionate I became about it. I think that's true for most people when they find what it is they really want to do with their lives.
Yeah. I think it's something interesting in I think in any subject, right? So like in any subject of life, even like stamp collecting, if you look closely enough and like you increase the resolution, it could be interesting. Like maybe not for you to like dedicate your life, but there's like I think it's a good lesson in terms of just learning. So maybe I want to go back to the inception a bit, but maybe to fast forward, maybe Pulp Fiction style. Talk to us about Surf Simply today. To give us a sense of the scale, the size, the business that you run.
So, well, very briefly, I moved out to Nosara in Costa Rica in 2007. So that's, I guess, 15 years ago now, 14 years ago. And I started doing lessons out the back of my car, and then slowly built it up. And we moved into a shop, and then we got a property, and then we built a second resort to replace the first one rather than in addition to it. And now we have a team of about 35 people. We have 12 guests who come along for a week-long course, which is all inclusive. It's not an inexpensive holiday. It's about $1,000 a day, which is kind of the top end for this industry that we're in. We've limited ourselves to just 12 people a week for various reasons, but it's really optimal in terms of the experience for the guests. We're booked out now about 2 years in advance, or about probably like 20 months in advance. And we have a waiting list for most weeks of 50 to about 150 people. So it's been a really interesting business to build and to see, really kind of blossom, I think, by pretty much any metric that you would measure a business by. But, as we talked about before, I made this decision to kind of keep it small and not actually to, start franchising it out, duplicating it, or scaling it up.
Yeah, I was about to ask, right? So it seems like you have so much pent up demand. I'm like, okay, so where's Surf Simply, 2.0, and another part of Costa Rica or another exotic location? What led you to make that decision of like, like I want to stay at this size and focus on quality versus the classic, like go raise some money from the bank or an investor and like start building out a franchise or any other like expansion method? How was the debate in your mind?
So I think that there's nothing wrong with scaling a business up if you want to grow to be the next Apple or Google. I think that that's great. But I don't think it should be the default for anyone. I think you want to work backwards and, ask yourself what your goals are as an entrepreneur, and then work backwards and ask yourself if scaling your business up is the right decision for you. Whether it's the right decision for the business could be different. My personal journey was, I really thought about, okay, well, what do I want out of life? I'm lucky enough to have got this business that could scale very easily. And then what does my life look like when I've got, 10 or 20 Surf Simplies and, 300 on the team rather than 30? What are the things that are important to me, and what do I really want out of that? So there was a couple of factors, and I think the first one is that I'm fortunate enough to have got to a point in my life where a lack of money doesn't make me unhappy. So I've reached the point where, I mean, sure, I could be making a lot more money and have lots more cars and a bigger house, but I never am at the point where actually financial stress causes me to be unhappy. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, what are the things that actually are going to make for a happy life? Which sounds a bit hippy dippy, but I honestly don't believe that even the most mercenary entrepreneur doesn't want to be happy, right? And we can look at the science there, and actually famously the most long-running scientific study, which is now headed by a guy called Robert Waldinger out of Harvard University, looked at all of the metrics that make for a happy life, and then looked for the decisions that correlated with them. And to summarize his 20-minute TED talk down into sort of 30 seconds, the most important thing really is to have really good quality relationships with the people that you spend the most time with. And of course, there are other things which can take away from that happiness, financial stress, ill health, and all those kind of things. But I really thought, you know what, I want to have those really good quality relationships, and B, I want to build something that I'm really proud of, because I get a real kick out of it. Now, like most people, the people that I actually spend the most time with isn't my family or my friends. It's the people that I work with, who, as it happens, are my friends pretty much, and kind of feel like family. But so I thought, well, I want to have really, really good relationships with the people that I work with. And I want those people to be really happy. Like, how do I think of this business as the project of taking away the financial stresses in their lives, making sure they have great relationships with each other, making sure they come into work and they're really happy with what they do, and that I have good relationships with them, because that way, I'm going into work every day, and so is everyone I work with, like really enjoying themselves. And then the other thing is, and this is just purely kind of narcissistic, but I get such a kick out of hearing people who've stayed at Surf Simply tell me what a great experience it was for them. And I go in every Friday, and I chat with all of the guests. I see them actually quite a lot during the week, because I swim out with them and film them out in the water, which is a good way to see what's going on. But when they talk to me at the end of the week, it feels great. And so, and this was the second thing, and this is what I would encourage listeners to your podcast to think about. When you're engaged in the project of trying to make something as good as it possibly can be, that's the most fun part of a business. And quite often, engaging secondarily in the project of scaling it is actually less fun. Sure, the bank account might go up, but I would say that for most people, and this is just my intuition, it's not actually as enjoyable. And every week on week, me and the rest of the team, and I gave equity actually to a few of the team, so I now have partners. We try and just make their week a little bit better, whether it's the food or the way we're coaching, or the massages, the rooms, the hospitality side of it. And it getting better and better and better is just like it's so much fun. I really enjoy it. I can't imagine wanting to do something else.
Yeah. I like that lesson that you mentioned to tie back to surfing. It's like you're trying to improve all the time in a sport, and that should be the case too for running a company. Where, like I said, it's small, little incremental improvements, and over time, go catch that big wave. I'm probably horrendous with my analogies right now, but I find it's a pretty good lesson, like you said, in terms of continuous improvement. How do you balance? Like, it seems like obviously you love your job, you love what you're doing. How do you balance the I want to say the challenges of being the boss and having to make the tough calls of having to fire people that you consider your friends? And I understand it's a challenge, but how do you balance the two, and what have you learned over the years?
So I think that that's a really, really important question. Like we alluded to when we were chatting before the call, I think that firing people of your team is something that no entrepreneur wants to talk about, because everyone likes the idea that they're this great inspirational leader who brings out the best in everyone. One of the things I'm most proud of, and we get the most positive feedback about from people who've stayed with us, is that our team are just, we've got like 10 pointers, the whole team, like everyone is just really, really fantastic. And I think there's two parts to that. There's stick and carrot. And, the carrot part is I see myself as someone who it has become quite good at hiring people where all you need to do is move objects out of their way and then they just shine. Um, I haven't ever learned how to, polish a turd up to be a bar of gold, so to speak. But I think I'm pretty good at picking people and getting out of their way and letting them be the best professional version of themselves. And I think that really is the best way to think about it. Sometimes you get someone come along who just they they're not going to be a good part of the team. They're going to cause a lot of stress for other people. It's going to be a negative experience for your customers. Interact with them. And you give it a really good go at trying to make that person be the best version of themselves. And at a certain point, you have to just say, okay, it's my responsibility to the rest of the team that they don't have to work with this person. And there's a couple of things that I think are really important when you make that decision. One of them is whenever you fire someone, or at least whenever I've fired someone, which is only a few times, you always look back, kind of like a relationship, and you're like, why didn't I do that like 2 years before or 3 years before? So, that hindsight, you always kind of have that feeling. But I think when you let them go, everyone else in the team who has dedicated their professional lives to this project, this business that they're building with you, it's a reminder to them that actually, anyone can be let go at any time, and it leaves a scar, and that scar kind of stays there. So you have to balance, like, what's the benefit of them going with the scar that gets left behind? And I think that's one thing. I think it's important that when they walk out the door, you leave them with dignity and you leave them with financial security, so that everyone who stays behind really can see three things very clearly. One of them is that you left that person with their head held high when they walked out. You didn't do anything that would, humiliate them, even in a very subtle kind of undermining way. And second, they see that you gave them financial security so that when they left, they weren't in trouble. And the third thing is that it's important that everyone really understands why they had to go. I don't think if you took any of the Surf Simply team aside and talked about the 3 or 4 people that I've had to fire over the last 5 years, and you asked them why they'd left, they would be able to tell you, like, oh yeah, I know exactly why that person has gone. And much as I like them, it's so much better now that they're gone. And I'm grateful that Rue actually stepped in and did that, because it's never fun. So I think that's one of the tricky but essential skills that one needs to develop.
Yeah. Going back to the size of your business and like focus on quality, like you said, you have almost 2 years of demand, and you've despite being a certain size, it looks like you guys punch above your weight when it comes to your online footprint, obviously your notoriety. I imagine a lot of it starts with your product, which is surfing, right? And the ability to attract people, like you said, not going off the super low end or the super high end, having this interesting middle spot, which is an underserved market. But curious about any insights you've had about building the business and to get it to the point where you're actually attracting more than you can handle, and then you're able to project out demand, and also I imagine it has an impact on getting high quality talent that wants to work with you guys. So I imagine it didn't happen overnight, right? What's the 10 year for an overnight success? So just maybe some of the lessons you learned along the way.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is, one of the questions that I get asked quite a lot is, what's the trick to what's the secret? What's the magic sauce at Surf Simply? And I always respond by saying it's a little bit like saying to someone, "Oh, that Boeing 747 that flies, like, what's the trick to making it fly?" Right? And of course, the answer is there's 10,000 things that all have to be working perfectly in order for that plane to take off and not drop out of the air. There's no one thing, and again, I would advocate staying small and paying attention to details and incremental improvement over time. I think that especially in the area of tech, and I have a lot of friends who work in tech, and there's a lot of emphasis and credence given to ideas. And I actually think that we need to sort of value ideas less and value execution more, because what differentiates, I think, Surf Simply isn't anything conceptual, it's more the execution. Having said that, we are very, very lucky that this gap that I described to you earlier, this sort of 98% of surfers for which there was no coaching product really available. There's a huge untapped market that we were able to step into. But like any untapped market, in the beginning, I had to actually work really hard to convince people that there was value in getting coaching if they were already an experienced surfer of 5 or 10 years. So there was a lot of conversations where people would say, oh, my partner doesn't surf, so they'll be doing lessons, but I already surf, so I don't need lessons. And I would be like, well, if you already play tennis or golf, you wouldn't be like, hey, I don't need lessons, I already play tennis. And they'd be like, oh, I guess so. But people were understandably skeptical just because they'd had so many experiences where they didn't get value coaching. So, the coaching had to be really good. And I think that's the second thing, which is, before I opened Surf Simply, I was, as I mentioned before, working for about 10 years coaching, doing 4 lessons a day, 10 people a lesson, so 40 people a day. So it's like 15, 16, 17,000 people that I got to coach over that time. And, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours things has been quite widely debunked, but the principle is sound. I mean, you really do need to put the hours in. And, I just think, again, that's something that a lot of people don't think about, putting 5 or 10 years of just that hard graft to really make sure you understand whatever it is that you're going to do, whether it's, software or baking cakes or teaching surfing. So I think that's important. The final part of your question, which I think is also a really good one about attracting talent. So it's been interesting as Surf Simply's reputation has grown that, we now find ourselves falling over resumes and just trying to pick out the cream of the crop sort of thing. Whereas in the beginning, again, it was really hard to attract talent. One thing that I try really hard to do is make sure that, I guess this is like a little tip or a trick, but I try to make sure that the parents of all of the team really know what they're doing and how amazing what they do is, and that they're really proud of them, because that carries a lot of weight. This is a little bit pithy and not always true, but I quite like the idea that what you want to really do is impress the friends of your employees' parents, because then then that trickles down to a lot of happiness within the whoever the member of the team is, because everyone wants their parents to be stoked and everyone wants to be able to go home and show people what they do. And you mentioned that you'd watch some of the videos we put out every week, and we put those out for our guests to see, and we put them out because it's a great way of people who are going to put down a substantial deposit in a week to know that this is not just a one-off promo video, but we put these out every week. But actually a really big part of it is because I know that the parents of all of the staff watch those videos and they show them to their friends and their families, and all of the team's families are really proud of what they do. And like that's I don't know, that's something that I'm more proud of than many other things that may seem more obvious, like the waiting list or the price point.
I'm totally stealing this idea of your team's parents. It's like it's such a great hack. It makes sense, right? You want to ensure your team is happy, and that's really a great way. The other thing you mentioned, we're going back to a point before about your friends working in tech, and obviously your use of technology and platforms. I noticed that you guys have started offering online coaching as well. So just curious as to how's your model switched, let's say, in the past 2 years? Has there been a switch with the pandemic? Have you felt any changes? Considering now, I think it's much more in the public consciousness that, hey, you can do online coaching for basically anything now. So curious to hear you of how it's changed your model.
So again, I think that's a really good question. But and incidentally, when I say these are good questions, it's because they really are. That's not just an interviewee, thing that people say.
Thanks, I'll take it.
Yeah. So I think there's two things here. Thing one is, definitely it's changed a lot over the last year, for obvious reasons. I think that people are just starting to get used to paying things online. I think a few years ago there was sort of a default assumption that everything online's free. People are more used to paying subscription fees, and that's just more normal, even for lower income people that might not have a few years ago. And that's opened the door to online coaching in just about everything. I mean, we've seen things like BetterHelp kind of explode over the last year. So there's definitely more of a market for it now. I think people still sort of think of the online experience as being secondary to the in-person experience. And the trouble with that from a business point of view is that it doesn't actually take less time or work. Sometimes it takes more time and work as the person delivering whatever it is online, whether it's a session or a coaching lesson or whatever. So at the moment, there's a gap which needs to be bridged. And I think that's going to happen culturally as people get more used to doing stuff online. And the quality of experience that people have online, it gets better and better. And it doesn't sort of feel for most people like a sort of a second grade experience. So for us as a business model, the numbers don't quite work yet. I mean, I'm just kind of pulling these numbers slightly out of the air. I can't remember exactly, but more or less, we tested the market, and we tried pricing an hour online video session at $300, and we didn't really get any takers. And we're probably better positioned than anyone in the world to charge a premium for online surf coaching. So that was just an interesting data point. And we dropped the price down to I think like $95, and then we got a lot more takers. But what we then found was if we were actually going to be having coaches going. Doing, even if they were full all year doing online coaching, at that price point, you can barely pay that coach a decent salary, and there's definitely no profit to be made on it. So that needs to kind of come together, and I think that's probably true across multiple industries. In surfing, as it happens, there's an additional barrier, which is that people have to go and get footage of themselves surfing. And that's a problem that we haven't really figured out how to solve. At the moment, I can tell you that we've got around 100 or so people lined up for our online product, which is something we just kind of do on the side for fun. It's not really our main business. It's more like a project. But they're all just not able to get footage of themselves surfing. So that's a problem that's specific to surfing that we need to solve. Although perhaps that's a problem in other sports too. If people are doing coaching, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's where we're at, and hopefully that the culture will move forward so that the price point starts to make sense for more people in more industries.
Yeah, maybe it's just a question of it's maybe just too nascent still, and it seems like the popularity of the sport is on the rise. Right? So as more and more people get into it, then you have more people that are slightly more affluent, willing to pay. And yeah, like you said, technology is helping. Maybe drones. I saw the use of drones, on your end, but it's like, yeah, there's more people own drones. It'll be easier for them to do it as well. Speaking about the future and stuff, that's cool. Like, what are the exciting developments that you're, looking at in terms of your industry stuff that is catching your eye? That maybe it's not quite there yet, but that's piquing your interest.
Oh, well, AR is going to be just totally game changing. I mean, so, when I first started, doing this like 20 years ago, most people hadn't seen themselves surf on camera. Well, quite a lot of people still haven't. And it's absolutely mortifying. It's a little bit like hearing yourself sing. So, we're almost, when we have experienced surfers come along, quite a lot of our guests have surfed for 10 or 20 years and they see themselves on camera for the first time. And we're almost like ready with the emotional support when they have that first, that first bit. But anyway, so now, when we have someone out in the water, we'll have usually a camera from the beach and a drone, and then I'll be out swimming, getting the water angles, so that when we're giving people a coaching feedback session at the resort after that morning session, there's quite often 2 or 3, sometimes 4 camera angles on any particular maneuver, so they can really kind of pick it apart. One thing that we've been playing with recently is putting a VR headset on people and then going out and recording sessions with the 360 camera and actually getting people to then experience it. And then you can freeze it and you can point at a point on the wave or a wave as it's starting to form, ask them to make predictions about what it's going to do. So the technology with VR is I don't know what your thoughts on it are, but it feels very early adopter, kind of clunky at the moment. And we haven't quite just crossed that threshold where it's really frictionless to use. But that'll be game changing. And then my fantasy is when we can stick some sort of, lightweight glasses or something on people out in the water, and then a coach next to them can start dropping visual cues in the ocean about what a wave is going to do in real time and, where they should be performing a maneuver. And I mean, then that'll be, sci-fi next level surf coaching. We've also, I'm lucky enough to have been invited up to Kelly Slater's Artificial Wave a few times. And actually the guys from the WSL, we kind of did an exchange with them and they all came down and stayed with us as well, which was really fun. But that's amazing, and I think artificial waves are going to change things a lot too. And if we build another Surf Simply, I think it'll probably be around an artificial wave. But at the moment, I'm just sitting back and seeing which is going to be the VHS and which is going to be the Betamax before we jump into it. I really aged myself
Yeah.
with that analogy.
Yeah, I still have a VCR player somewhere in the closet, but yeah, no, totally understand. And it's interesting, yeah, going back to your technology piece, like, yeah, the air glasses, I think need to be waterproof first.
Yeah,
that'd be a first point. But I think to your point, yeah, the technology is not quite there, but it's not as far off as most people think, right? Like, so we're still talking about in the order of magnitude of years, but not decades, right? So it's like it's going to be sooner than most people realize. Apple has famously been working on their secret project now for a few years, but
yeah.
like it's gonna happen in this decade for sure. So it's not quite there, but it's like it's slow at first, and then all of a sudden it's there. So I think, like you said, that's a super interesting development. Maybe to zoom out and talk about your experiences, now that you've been running the business for a few years. So curious as to like what's been harder, what's been easier, in terms of, obviously, when you're starting, it's a startup, there's a lot of heavy lifting, but now as, you've found your rhythm, you're more in execution mode. What's, over time, what's gotten easier and what's gotten more difficult?
Um, I I think I was just laughing because every time there's something that I think, oh, if I can get someone else to do this, then I will have freed up a lot of time to either do this or perhaps even have a bit of downtime. And that just never happens. I forget there's some rule about work expanding to fill the time allotted to it. Um, but I mean, one thing that has become a lot easier is at a certain point, I would wake up in the morning and I would go and meet the guests, chat with them over breakfast, and then go out and coach them surfing, and then come back and then edit all the footage. And then I'd be replying to all the emails of people wanting to book, and then doing accounts at the same time. And I mean, I did that for about 10 years, but from my late 20s to my late 30s. I couldn't do it now. I'm 43 now. I don't have that energy. So I think when you're a young person, and by young I mean under 40, you're particularly between 30 and 40, you're uniquely placed to have both the energy that it takes to really push a business forwards. And also, and it's unfortunate that society is this way, but it just is. People listen to you. People pay attention to you in a way that they don't if you're 25. When you're 35, you walk into a room and people pay attention. And unfortunately, that's a bell curve that then drops off as people get older, unfortunately. So, I think really pushing forwards in that time of your life when you've got the energy to do it, I think is incredibly important. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What I was talking about before that.
It was what gets easier and what gets harder,
Oh
like
yeah. So
as you've been managing. Yeah.
one of the things that I think has got, I don't know if it's easier, but certainly it's very important, and I'm now able to do it, is really standing back and taking the 10,000 foot view. I carve out time in my day now, which I couldn't have done before, where I can actually like really step back, not trying to achieve something specific, but just look at the business. And actually with my two of my business partners, Harry and Jesse, we explicitly have it arranged that Jessie is in charge of the week. That's the time scale that she thinks about. Harry is in charge of the year. That's the time scale he thinks about. Like the coaching team needs to be better in 12 months than they are now. And I'm in charge of the decade. Where are we going to be in 10 years? What do the numbers look like? Am I setting up retirement plans for people? That kind of stuff. And I think that, again, not enough businesses think in that way. Quite often we split tasks in terms of, someone's the financial officer and someone else is communications. But I think not enough conversation is had around splitting responsibilities in terms of timescale. And I think that's something that every group of business owners should do more.
That's pretty interesting insight. I like how, as the founder and your CEO, you have the long view of where the business is headed. So I think that's a pretty good insight. So maybe to ask you maybe one or two final questions then for you, Bruce, like where is Surf Simply in 10 years?
Well, I love the idea of being able to open a Surf Simply on an artificial wave. That would be really fantastic. Being able to push the price as I have to a point where we can get all of the team past that point where they have the financial freedom to have kids, buy cars, get out mortgages, and really build a life for themselves. That actually is my business goal, over and above anything that's particularly customer facing. But of course, that only makes sense as a business goal if you're also running a really fantastic business. But the way I think about it is, if I look back and I'm 60 and there's this group of 35, 40 people that are able to say, look, because of working at Surf Simply, I was able to have this life, and I'm really grateful for it. I'm really stoked. I can't imagine a better feeling as a doddery old guy than that. So that, more than anything else, that's really my business goal. Which again kind of brings us back to that scale thing. It's like, I worry a lot about the team. I don't have kids. Sometimes it feels like I just have 35 kids that I worry about. Uh, if I had 300, I don't think it's possible to just authentically care about 300 people in the same way. We're just not built like that. And I really value that.
Yeah, Ru, I think it's been a pleasure to have you on. I think it's such a great way to end the conversation. A final question would be is, if one of people want to learn more about what you guys are doing and want to connect, what's the best way?
Just go to surfsimply.com, and you can reach out and make a booking. As I say, we are booked quite far in advance, but you can always jump on the cancellation list, and then if a gap opens up, we do a lottery for everyone on the waiting list. We also have a lot of free resources online. Our YouTube channel, which just type Surf Simply into YouTube, and we have tutorials up there. We have animated videos about surf science, and we put out little movies every week about what's happening at the resort. If you want to listen to me waffle on like this about a whole range of different topics, I think we have like 74 or 75 podcasts out, which are kind of surf related, but we also dive into a lot of other stuff. We try to make sure that they're interesting for people who are not into surfing as well. So there's a lot in there as well. Thank you so much for having me on. I've really
Awesome.
enjoyed our conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Ru.